Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are reviewing a compilation of interviews on the importance of creating an inclusive environment that promotes opportunities for all talent to reach its potential. In this video, we get to learn from Tim Richmond, Executive Vice President and CHRO of AbbVie, Sean Woodruff, Executive Vice President and Chief People, Culture, and Communications Officer of Lincoln Financial. And when he did this interview, he was the CHRO of TIAA. Alex Taylor, Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for Northern Trust. Lucien Alziari, Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for Prudential Financial. Christian Meisner, CHRO of GE Aerospace, and when we conducted this interview, he was the CHRO of Kaiser Permanente. Tom Plath, the SVP of HR and Global Citizenship at International Paper. Ernest Marshall, CHRO of Eaton. And Michael O'Hare, the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer of the Estee Lauder Company.
Well, it always kind of at some simple level is, you need the diversity in your workforce to reflect the diversity of the patients that you serve in our case, or whoever your consumers might be. And so I think diversity makes you better. I think it makes you more capable. I think it provides different perspectives. I think there's so many positive business imperatives. To me, it's just the right thing to do and also the smart thing to do. Yeah, really trying to elevate what we're doing in the sense of a sense of belonging. I think that's a broader concept for some, but certainly belonging is important to the sense of diversity that you have. If people don't feel like I can belong here or I feel connected here, that's something that's going to be a disconnect for a workforce. I think the idea also that I'm inspired. So I belong, I'm inspired are really critical feelings of importance for diversity. And I think also the reality is we're trying to grow the representation of our workforce in certain areas. It's an important part of what an HR professional does. It's also just a good business practice.
For us to have the best possible workforce, we need access and exposure to the biggest talent pool. If we were to focus on simply a homogeneous pool of talent, we would be restricting our ability to get access to the biggest pool. So apart from the obvious virtue of having a diverse workforce, but purely from a practical/pragmatic point of view, having access to the biggest pool of talent means that we have to think about, survey, access, interview, recruit the biggest possible pool of talent. That means by necessity it has to be a diverse talent pool. For us at TIA, we have been focused on diversity before perhaps it might have been in vogue to so do. The first woman that was appointed to our board of trustees was in the 1940s, Ada Comstock, who was the president of Radcliffe University. And here we are 70 years later, TIA's board of trustees are a majority women. There are more women on our board than there are men. That is who we are. For us, it is part and parcel of who we are and what we believe is necessary to compete in an increasingly challenging, competitive environment. We have to have a diverse culture, and that means we have to attract women, we have to attract underrepresented minorities, we have to attract colleagues from the LGBTQ plus community, we have to attract veterans, we have to attract the widest possible pool of diverse talent.
I don't view diversity, equity, inclusion as as side business. I mean, diversity, equity, inclusion is something that we have to pull through everything we do to really change the hearts and minds and make an impact. And so, what does that look like from an HR perspective? It's integrating diversity, equity, inclusion through the entire value chain, from attraction to development to creating alumni of the organization. And so we've tried to really embed those practices throughout. And so as you start to think about, what does it take to win business? I mean, many organizations as part of RFPs are asking for diversity, equity, and inclusion information as part of, awarding that business. And so I think the more that you can start to tie those measures to ultimately the success and the bottom line, the more success that you're going to have.
We're all human beings. We all have our own beliefs. We all have our set of perspectives about what's important, and we bring that into the workplace. But also the workplace is a place for work and to stay focused on serving the needs of customers. And so one of the things that I remember coming to the United States many years ago is you don't talk about politics at work, and it's still pretty good advice, actually. You also need to remember that, our workforce it's the voice of America. There's going to be that whole spectrum of points of view. And we have to respect that everybody will have their own individual points of view on issues and all that goes along with that. But we also have a company environment that we believe in very strongly and a set of values that we believe in very strongly. So you don't get a pass on respect for others, all right? We are a company that believes very strongly in the respect that we have for each other, and that we will treat each other with respect, and you don't get any passes on that. And so you can believe whatever you choose to believe, and I have no say in that. When you're at Prudential, you behave in a way that works for us as a
First,
company.
it's tied to the whole DNA of the company. If you look at the history of Kaiser Permanente and where we started 75 plus years ago, you'll see things like care wards that were integrated. Right? When you think about the 1950s in the US, that wasn't the case in a lot of our institutions. That's where we started. And so we have a rich legacy of it being in our DNA. Second piece is we enjoy, I would say, pretty good diversity in our organization today. Close to 50% of our executive population are women. Over a third are people of color. And actually, if you look at the C-suites of the CEO's direct reports, those numbers are actually higher. So I'd say first we come from, a solid foundation in history. But when we think about EID or DEI, I think of it through three lenses. First, our employees. And our fundamental belief is every employee should have the equal right to fulfill and attain their ultimate potential, whatever that is and however they define it, an equal right. Through the lens of the organization, through Kaiser Permanente, we want to have the best talent on the planet, period. Not in healthcare, not in the United States, on the planet. And you cannot, right, if you are not equally accessing all the talent. And so there's a huge compelling piece for the organization. And then finally, for our communities and members, if you think about what we do as an organization, right, we deliver health care at the bedside. And if you think about that relationship with your customer, if you will, compared to other industries, you're often seeing that individual at one of the most vulnerable moments in their life. They're getting a test back, or they're going to have to take a test, or there's something serious happening in their life. And what all the research shows, as well as just a lot of common sense, is if you've got a person who you can relate to, who might look like you or share experiences or background, that experience is going to be much more impactful, and it's going to be a better experience. And so for us to ultimately deliver on our mission, having a diverse organization that reflects the communities we serve is absolutely essential. And so whether it's our history, whether it's through the eyes of our employee, the organization, or our members, I think that the opportunity and the obligation to be world-class in this area is a no-brainer.
The business case within International Paper for diversity has two parts to it. Number one is we are a very strong recruit from within, promote from within company. In a world like that where I've had 15 different roles in this company over the last 31 years. In a company like that, it's really, really important to make sure that at every opportunity to promote, you have the best talent available. By definition, you can't have the best talent available if you don't have all the talent available. And so we look broadly. We look at every category, every characteristic, whether they've worked in International Paper, been working outside, whether it's global or local, what the demographics are. And so much of that is determined by what is that recruitment pool that you're going after. That's a really critical part. So the first answer to the business case is you have to have access to all the talent. The second is we just are on the front end of introducing a new value for the company. We have 3 values today: safety, ethics, and stewardship. There's another value that we're going to be adding, and it's termed as a verb in this case, very active. It's include and engage. You can include people. If you don't engage them, you're not getting all the value. And so the other part of this business proposition for diversity and inclusion is we know that if you include and engage a broad group of people that come from different angles, have different perspectives, have different value sets, you're going to get the best answers. And that's, at the end of the day, what we're after. And so the pool of talent, making sure that you've got access to everyone, making sure that you've got an include and engage type value in your culture is going to be an important part of that.
And so what are some of the things that you can do to actively include and engage people throughout the organization?
We think a lot about succession planning, what the future needs. So when we talk about what the organizational needs are for leadership, for hourly positions as they're moving up and through, we think about what does the organization need, what does the individual need. The organization needs a slate of succession candidates that is as broad as possible, that comes from as many different angles where you have a real choice. What the individual needs is opportunity to grow, relationships, etc. So very specifically, we think about succession a lot. We talk about it all the time. We're in meetings constantly asking the question, how do we make sure that if this person goes, if we need to succeed this person, what does that look like? On the flip side, we really focus hard on making sure about readiness of candidates, making sure that the pool is complete. If we have to level the playing field by giving certain people access that they don't have before, what we want to be able to do is, at the end of the day, select the best candidate from a diverse pool of talent. If we can get there and we can satisfy organizational need, it's nirvana.
It's incredibly important to me personally as a diverse person, but also to Eaton. The top leadership of the company's over 50% diverse. I think it's important because what really drives the best results and ideas are diverse perspectives and experiences. And diversity brings you that. It allows an organization to kind of have a holistic look at a problem or an issue or strategy that you just don't get if your pool's not diverse. And I see the richness in the discussion that we have as a senior leadership team because we all bring a different piece of that diversity to the equation. The collective intellect of that group goes up because of the diversity in the room. And so for Eaton, it's really important to not only profess how we want to be more diverse, but actually be intentional about it. And I think that's what we're starting to do now is we've got to pull through. It's one thing to have the people down in the organization. I think what you find is we do great jobs recruiting diversity. Holding on to diversity is another issue. And it's pulling people through and really being intentional about it and holding people accountable for diversifying their teams. We start with the data because, and we make it clear and easy for people to understand. Because what happens sometimes when you talk about diversity, people get mired in the minutia. Rather than let's focus on here's the issue, front and center, it's very clear, and then let's do something about it. I'll give you an example. And we showed this to the board. It was quite powerful. We are trying to get more women in the organization. And, clearly that starts with recruiting more, putting more on slates. But what we really honed in on, just to make the point, is what we found is if we get women to the offer phase, we have a 90% acceptance rate. So that's one of the examples we're trying to do. The other is, we did an analysis, same thing. Where are our diverse people sitting? Are they in the pathway roles that would lead them to general managers? Because that's one of our focus areas. It shocked us, the data shocked us in ethnic minorities, for example, 60% of our people were there, but we're not pulling them through, right? And so again, you take all of the anecdotes out of the equation and you talk about real data, make it simple for people, and then you say we need to drive better outcomes. And those are some of the things that we're trying to do for the organization. And then hold leaders accountable. You know, we have our team present to the board about our pipeline and how we're going to diversify it in the future. Accountability, showing them the data, have specific actions, and then show what outcomes you're achieving over time.
When you do diversity inclusion in the United States and you think about EOC and you think about transposing the model across the United States, it's relatively easy to do. In other words, you have good statistics, you have good point of view, you know what available workforce is. How you move that around the world, you can't transpose the same model and assume that there's the same levers of legislation, understanding, and frankly, social justice that exists from country to country. How China or Australia or Europe thinks about the same problems in the United States are fundamentally different. So you have to build bottom up versus a top down approach to how you build inclusion plans. So your issue might be language, or it might be race, or it might be nationality in various countries. That's your biggest issue. So it's very bottom up as versus top down. And I think I learned based on my own experiences, because I was rotated in many of my previous companies around the world. So I sat in China, I sat in Europe, I sat in works councils, I did union work in the United States, and I realized the world is so uneven, and people are like, well, you know, there should be a certain level of civil rights and social justice. It's incredibly uneven. So the arrogance to assume that you can transpose the same model, you just can't.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today we were treated to thoughts from 8 leading CHROs about their ideas regarding the importance of creating organizations that foster environments where talent can thrive. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.